Thank you for standing by and welcome to the Agricultural Trade Promotion Program webinar. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. Should you wish to ask a question during the presentation, please use the chat feature located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded. I would like to now turn the conference over to Ken Isley, USDA Foreign Agricultural Service Administrator. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And it's 1 o'clock p.m. in Washington, D.C., so good afternoon or good morning, wherever you're calling in from. Based on the number of participants, it seems there's a great interest in the webinar in the Agricultural Trade Promotion Program that's going to be described in more detail during this call. First, I would like to thank you for participating in the call, particularly on a Friday before Labor Day weekend. And I'd also like to remind everyone that this is one of 3 programs that are being announced by USDA in reaction to the illegal and improper retaliatory tariffs as a result of the ongoing trade disruptions. As this administration has said numerous times, we have the back of American farmers, and we're not going to allow American farmers and ranchers to stand alone in reaction to the trade disruption issues. We also recognize that these programs don't replace trade. We are working very hard to restore normal trade, and I would say beyond restore normal trade, to try to make long-term improvements in the competitiveness of U.S. commodities, agricultural commodities, by removing some of those trade barriers that exist, not just tariff trade barriers, but non-tariff trade barriers that all too often put us in a more difficult competitive position. So we continue to ask for your patience, your resilience as the administration works through some of the ongoing trade issues. But I don't want to consume very much of the time on this call because I really want to allow Mark Slupak, who's our Deputy Administrator for the Office of Trade Programs, to get into the details. Mark and his team have been working overtime trying to clarify all of the details of the program, which he will now convey to you. As a reminder, this conference call not only is recorded, but it'll be posted on our website after it's concluded. So again, thank you for your participation and your continued support, and I'll now turn it over to Mark.
Thank you, Administrator Isley, and thank you all for participating. We're doing a little bit of adjusting in our chairs here in the office, and I'll be ready to go in a second. All right, I want to start by, I'm not going to say a lot of extra here today. I want to start by letting you know, before we get started, that this webinar is about the program as it is. I do not plan to talk about the internal processes or decisions that were made along the way to get us here, nor will I talk about the market facilitation program or the food purchase and distribution program that are being operated by other parts of USDA. With that caveat, I think I'll begin. Okay, so you see the first slide there, the Agricultural Trade Promotion Program, or the ATP. I am Mark Slupak. I'm the Deputy Administrator of the Office of Trade Programs. The Office of Trade Programs, as a lot of you certainly know, is the office in the Foreign Agricultural Service that operates the Market Access Program, the Foreign Market Development Program, the Emerging Markets Program, the Technical Assistance for Specialty Crops Program, the Quality Samples Program, and many other programs, but those are the market development programs that are most similar to the ATP. Sorry, on that, for that first slide we have the date of August 27th, 2018. That was the day that this was initially going to take place, but there were some delays in getting the program published. So on to slide 2. What is the ATP? The ATP is a program designed to provide funding to U.S. ag industries impacted by tariffs to conduct activities that promote U.S. agricultural commodities in foreign markets. It is not the market access program. It's not an infusion of funds to an existing program. It's not the FMD or any of the others, but we do see it as a companion to those programs. The concept of the ATP is that due to severe financial impacts of trade actions, which Mr. Isley went through a little bit there, for example, the imposition of tariffs by other countries, these impacts are disrupting the marketing of U.S. ag commodities. To ameliorate such impacts, the USDA decided to use its authority to establish the ATP to provide assistance to eligible organizations for generic or branded promotion and for activities to address existing or potential non-tariff trade barriers. I think that slide speaks for itself. In case you're interested in a little inside baseball, the authority for the ATP is Section 5 of the Commodity Credit Corporation Charter Act, which includes the authority for CCC to use its general powers to aid in the development of foreign markets for agricultural commodities. That's the citation, the U.S. code there in the second bullet. This is not a farm bill program. The coincidence of the timing is very interesting. We are hard at work in cooperation with the U.S. Congress, questions that they have trying to finish up the farm bill. This is not part of the farm bill process. This is the same authority that we use to operate the Quality Samples Program, for those of you who have ever participated in that. ATP publications. Okay, I think this one, this is kind of timely. The final rule was published yesterday. It establishes regulations that guide the program, and that's most of what we're going to talk about here today. Notice of funds availability. It establishes deadlines and application guidelines. It was just published about an hour ago, maybe a little bit, an hour and a half ago, on grants.gov. And then finally, the information collection package is required. It's part of the final rule, actually, that was published yesterday. It's required of us to collect information necessary from you, whether you're applicants or end up being participants. In order for us to run the program, we have to have OMB approval to collect that information. And so in the final rule, there's a section that talks about our need to collect information, and it gives you the opportunity actually to provide comment on that. If you're interested in providing comment on the information collection, please read that part of the rule and take action accordingly. All right, so some milestones. Some of those are things that I just talked about. On July 24th, Secretary Perdue announced the USDA's Trade Mitigation Initiative, which includes those other two programs that I said I would not be talking about. This slideshow shows the NOFA, the Notice of Funds Availability, being published yesterday with the final rule. The slides had to be turned in 2 days ago. It turned out that the NOFA wasn't published until today. But as of now, the final rule was published yesterday, and the Notice of Funds Availability was published this morning. November 2nd is established in that Notice of Funds Availability as the initial application deadline. And so this is something that I want to spend a little bit of time on. The initial application deadline of November 2nd means that we will take applications till November 2nd, and we will not begin reviewing applications until after the close of business on November 2nd. I mean, we may take a look at them, but we will not be making any kind of funding decisions until December. So if there was any confusion for anyone by something that they saw somewhere else that might have led you to believe that we would be reviewing applications as we go, and if funds remained on November 2nd, then we would continue to take applications. That isn't how we meant it. What we meant was, if after the applications that have been received by November 2nd do not completely result in all of the available $200 million being allocated to participants, then we will continue to take further applications to the program. So let me say that again. On November 2nd, we will begin to review applications. After that review is complete of the applications that were reviewed by or that were received by November 2nd, if funds remain, we will continue to look at applications that came in after November 2nd. Hopefully that's clear enough. January 2019 is the estimate of when we will get funds apportioned by the Office of Management and Budget. So that would be when we would be able to begin allocating and obligating funds to successful applicants who would then become participants in the ATP. So the way we see it playing out, we will review applications beginning in early November for several weeks into December, and then we will start making a list of funding recommendations that I will provide to Mr. Isley, who you heard introduce me earlier, and decisions can be made toward the end of December as to what we would do with money that we hopefully will receive in January 2019. Okay, eligible organizations. I think this is probably something a lot of people are interested in as well. This list of eligible organizations is the same. If you are familiar, this is the same list as is in the Market Access Program. We will accept nonprofit U.S. agricultural trade organizations. We will accept nonprofit state regional trade groups. We will accept applications from state agencies, and we will accept applications from U.S. agricultural cooperatives. And it's a requirement that they can demonstrate damages suffered as a result of tariffs imposed on U.S. agricultural products in 2018-2019. So it's on the applicant. Okay, it's a requirement of the applicant to make the case that they were damaged as a result of tariffs imposed on U.S. ag products. I'll move forward from there. All right, so this kind of goes with that eligible organization slide as the priority. Similarly to our other programs, and again, we see this as a companion to those programs, and we work with many commodity organizations in the United States in other programs and in other ways through membership in the advisory committees, etc. The CCC, under the ATP, the CCC will give priority to organizations that have the broadest producer representation and affiliated industry participation of the commodity being promoted. What we do not anticipate doing is funding 25 different states that produce soybeans. We're not going to fund the Illinois Soybean Association and the Iowa Soybean Association and the Missouri Soybean Association unless that's the best way for us to promote U.S. soybeans. We will take a look at we will review applications as they come in, and we can't predetermine what we're going to get. So it's conceivable that we wouldn't, staying on the example of soybeans, it's conceivable that we wouldn't get an organization that has broader producer representation than state by state. And in that case, we would consider what to do going forward. Hopefully that is a good enough explanation. But you're free to ask questions, and I'll get to them at the end if it's not. Branded eligibility. Agricultural cooperatives can participate directly or indirectly through an ATP participant operating a brand program. So an agricultural cooperative can apply directly to the program, or it can work with another organization that is going to operate a brand program. We don't know who those are, but I believe that there will be organizations that are planning to apply, and they will notify people in their industries or in their regions that they are hoping to operate a brand program, and that they would be willing to take applications from companies or cooperatives in their industry or region. Which gets me to the second bullet. A for-profit entity may participate indirectly through an ATP participant operating a brand program if the entity's size does not exceed 300% of the small business size standard established for its industry and published at 13 CFR Part 121. That's an SBA citation in the Code of Federal Regulations. This is substantially different from how we operate the market access program. In the market access program, the small business size standard is the limit, is the high limit for a company that can participate through a MAP participant that operates a brand program. In this program, whatever the appropriate size standard is for the industry a small company is in, they can multiply that standard by 3, and that will be the limiting factor as to whether or not they can participate in the program. In either case, whether a small company or a company that's up to 3 times the size of a small company, for-profit entities cannot participate directly in the program. They have to participate through an ATP participant that is operating a brand program. Contribution requirements. For the generic part of the program, at least 10% of the value of ATP funding reimbursed by the Commodity Credit Corporation. So this is a CCC program. A participant will enter into an agreement ultimately with the CCC. So it'll be signed by the CEO of the organization on one side, and it'll be signed probably by me on the other side. And if that agreement is for $2 million, and ultimately the organization spends all $2 million, all of it eventually is reimbursed by CCC, then their contribution requirement would be at least $200,000 or 10% of the amount reimbursed by CCC. So if it's a $2 million agreement and they only end up spending $1.5 million, then the 10% of that $1.5 million would only be $150,000. So it's 10% of the amount, not of the agreement, but of the amount that of money that's actually received from CCC. On the branded portion, any company that participates or any cooperative that participates will be reimbursed no more than 50% of the total eligible expenditures made on an activity by a brand participant. So the eligible activities available to branded participants are somewhat more limited than they are under the generic program. And the way we operate is that if an activity is eligible and has been approved by the ATP participant, then once the appropriate paperwork has been handed in by the company, they'll be reimbursed up to half of that. So if it's a $100,000 expenditure, then CCC funds would reimburse up to $50,000 of that. And I encourage you, I'm not going to walk through eligible and ineligible contributions. I encourage you to look at section 1489.16, which discusses contributions in much greater detail. Please feel free to review the eligible and ineligible contributions there. If you have further questions of that in the future, I will have some contact information toward the end of these slides that will allow you to ask those questions. Okay, so the application, we will be receiving applications. People who are interested and who have UES password information are welcome to apply. Beginning today, I believe they can start entering ATP proposed activities. Anyone who has not, who's interested in becoming an ATP participant and has not applied through the UES prior to now will need to contact the Program Operations Division. You see at the bottom there, for assistance, contact the Program Operations Division at 202-720-4327 or through that UES admin email address to get help with establishing a UES ID and password and information on how to log in and get started. Eligible organizations that applied for the 2019 Market Access Program or Foreign Market Development Cooperator Program can add ATP-specific application information to their 2019 UES submission. So the UES, or Unified Export Strategy, submissions for MAP and FMD were due in June, and so we consider those to be the 2019 UES for any organization that applied. And so through their application, they'll be able to simply add ATP-specific application information. The application period, again, runs from now through November 2nd, 2018. And again, whatever we have on 2018 will be reviewed together and will compete for the $200 million in ATP funding. Okay, multi-year grants. This is something of a diversion from how we operate the Market Access Program and the Foreign Market Development Program. It might be a little bit more similar to what anyone who has participated in the Emerging Markets Program or the Technical Assistance for Specialty Crops Program or the Quality Samples Program in the past. Proposals for multiple years of funding under the Agricultural Trade Promotion Program are eligible. So someone who wants to apply for the program can indicate in their activity description anytime that an activity would take more than just a single year. So this is a diversion from how we've operated the other programs, as I said, and the system isn't necessarily built for this to be in there automatically. So if any activity is seen to be a longer-term activity and funding is being requested for longer than a 12-month period, that needs to be indicated in the text of the activity description so that it's clear to the reviewer that additional funding is being requested. And this is important. An explanation of the applicant's rationale for multiple years is required. So it's not enough to say we would like 3 years of funding that would total $150,000 to undertake this market development activity in Greenland. That is not sufficient. An explanation of why the multiple years is needed is required to make that request, for that request to be considered. I don't think that's much of a stretch for anybody, and I don't think it should be any kind of deal breaker, but we need to know that rationale since we're doing something that's a little bit out of the box for us. Indirect participation. Okay, I hit on this a little bit earlier. Eligible for-profit entities may only participate through an ATP participant. To be honest, we are not built in FAS. There's no office in CCC that's built to work with hundreds of companies that would be eligible under the program, and we have historically worked with several partners who are. So we anticipate that there will be significant interest in running brand programs, and that for-profit entities shouldn't have to look far to find an ATP applicant to apply to. Other entities that are eligible to participate directly in the program may be directed to participate through another ATP participant. And so there are times in running our other programs that we have seen that the most effective way to get a certain commodity covered under the programs is to have a group lean on another group that is more experienced in working with us in our programs. And so if there's for example, a small agricultural trade organization that's interested in participating but hasn't participated with us in other programs before, or has had some kind of difficulty in participating with us before, we may encourage them to participate through another ATP applicant that will eventually be approved. Okay, definitions. We're getting into the specifics of the reg now. I'm not going to go through the list of dozens of definitions, but the definitions are a great starting place for anyone who's considering applying to this program. I encourage you to take the time to walk through the definitions and carefully consider them before reading the rest of the reg. Because the eligible and ineligible activities that are listed in Section 17 refer to terminology that's defined in Section 11. So without understanding the definitions in Section 11, it may be easy to misinterpret one of the eligible or ineligible activities that appear in Section 17. All right, so with that, I'm going to jump ahead to Section 17, and we're going to talk a little bit about eligible activities. The first couple of slides under eligible activities include activities that are available for branded or generic promotion. So these would be eligible for generic promotion by trade organizations, state agencies, or state regional trade groups. Or they could be eligible for cooperatives that participate in the branded program, or small companies that participate through a different ATP participant. A lot of these are kind of obvious. Some of these I'll stop and spend a little bit more time on. Advertising in a variety of forms, including electronic advertising, which includes things like Twitter and Facebook, are eligible under the program. Point-of-sale materials, also eligible. In-store and food service promotions, where generally thinking of a person who is in a store talking to customers directly, that is eligible under the program. Seminars, training, trade shows, eligible. Travel to foreign trade shows and missions, eligible, but certainly limited. I encourage anyone who's interested in applying for any kind of travel under the program to spend some time reading carefully the details of what travel to a foreign trade show, for example, means. There are limitations on the number of people who can travel and can participate, and on who they might be within a company, for example. Certain subscriptions are eligible to be purchased with program funds, and temporary workers, for example, in an in-store food service promotion, you might need to hire someone locally to help deliver that promotion. That would be an eligible activity under the program. On to the second slide, sticking to branded or generic eligible activities. We are allowing giveaways for up to $2 per item. We'll reimburse up to $2 per item for small giveaways or large giveaways, but we only reimburse up to $2. That could be handed out to customers or other people in the trade to kind of put something in their hands that will remind them on a continuous basis of your company or your organization. Certain required labeling is eligible under the program. This is labeling that is required to do business in a certain market that you have not already produced. If you're going to apply for for funding to do that kind of labeling, I would suggest you spend a significant amount of time reading and considering the limitations there. Translation services that are needed for other activities are eligible. Foreign website development might be eligible. Again, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but please read the rules. I'm not going to provide all the details that appear in the rules here, but there is some description of how certain foreign-facing websites would be eligible. And then there are various other minor things that I'm not going to spend time on here that you can also find in that list. Please, again, read the rules. We spent a lot of time putting these rules together. We've tried to word things in a very specific way so that it's clear. If it's not clear, please reach it back out to us. But in the meantime, we'd like you to read the rules and think about them. Okay, now we're going to move on to a third slide of eligible activities, but these are activities that are eligible for generic promotion only. So this would include temporary contractor fees, where you may need to hire a contractor to deliver a different kind of activity. International travel expenses. This one, I'm going to stop here for a minute. This is a departure from how we do international travel under the other programs. We have got under MAP and FMD, for example, business class exceptions, where if someone's traveling over 14 hours or something like that, there are a couple of exceptions listed. We will allow for business class travel to be reimbursed. Under this rule, we are allowing business class travel for a target audience member. Okay, so this is not for someone who works at the headquarters of the ATP participant. This is someone who the industry is targeting as a key buyer or a key decision maker or influencer. Under this program, if their travel exceeds 5 hours, it will be eligible for the business class exception. Now, the business class exception for others remains at 14 hours, similar to the other programs, but when working with a target audience, a foreign target, we're going to allow the business class exception for travel over 5 hours. And rather than traveling business class, we always will allow for a rest stop instead, which basically, or not, I'm not sure if rest stop's the right way of putting it, but if once the person arrives at their destination, we'll also, instead of business class, if they travel economy, we'll allow for a 24-hour rest period before they need to start business. So and by allow, I mean that we will pay for their per diem expenses for that 24-hour period before they actually start working. If, however, they use the business class exception, there's no provision for a rest stop. They need to start working the next day. Market research is eligible for generic under the generic part of the program. Legal fees incurred in resolving trade issues. This is also something of a departure, at least from the market access program. If in resolving a trade issue, the legal fees are needed to complete paperwork or to develop some sort of documentation, those legal fees may well be eligible for reimbursement under the program. And we think that's consistent with the nature and the rationale for developing the program in the first place. Procurement and shipment of samples. This is something that's not in the market access program or the foreign market development program either. This is basically what the quality samples program is. So what's available under the quality samples program for the procurement of samples from your industry, and then the shipment of those samples from the point of purchase to the point of entry into the destination market is reimbursable under the ATP. And in this case, the follow-on required technical activity, the technical training educational component that's required under the QSP would also be generally eligible under the Agricultural Trade Promotion Program. Fourth slide of eligible activities, STRE, or Sales and Trade Relations Expenses, which is generally a way for paying for certain meals and receptions that are critical to trade relations, are going to be eligible under this program, whether they take place in the United States or whether they take place overseas. But the critical part of this is that they must be directed at a foreign target audience. So reading the rules on STRE is very important, and following the rules is even more important, as additional documentation is required to make sure that the rules have been followed. Domestic administrative support expenses. This is something that's a little bit different from anything we've done before. For some of under the market access program, state regionals and the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture and one other participant are allowed to claim their domestic administrative support expenses up to a certain limit that's determined in their approval letter under the program. Under this program, we are allowing that as well for state regional trade groups or NASDA. But in this program, we're also allowing other ATP participants under the generic program to be reimbursed for such expenses not to exceed 6% of their budget. Okay, this is a major departure from our other programs. The rationale here, and this is not to reimburse the expenses of people who already work in your home office or something like that, but the rationale here is that these are people who need to be employed to carry out this program, which is likely to be relatively short-term in nature. So what we didn't want to happen in administering the ATP is that someone got what quite honestly is an unexpected amount of funding. We know that people who participate in our other programs have an idea of what kind of funding they might get from year to year. This funding source is something of a surprise, and so planning to have people around to administer it may not have been considered in advance. So a small amount of program funds, 6%, can be set aside and reimbursed for hiring some kind of workers that are required to deliver the program. And this could be that a cooperator needs to hire an extra bookkeeper or some other type of office staff on a temporary basis, or some sort of semi-permanent basis to make sure that the ATP participant is able to comply with the regulations. What we didn't want was that this unexpected money would become a compliance burden for someone who might need it in this current trade environment. So that's the rationale. The limit is 6%. It's a significant departure. Please read the reg about this, and feel free to reach out to us if you have questions that are specific to your situation. But I wanted to stop and spend some time there, obviously. Onward, international staff conferences continue to be eligible under this program. Domestic travel for generic activities only to international trade shows that take place in the United States, and we have a definition of what an international trade show is in the regs. Seminars and international training opportunities are also eligible for reimbursement, and reverse trade missions, in other words, the opportunity to bring in key decision makers, influencers, buyers from targeted markets overseas and show them around your growing region or what have you. That travel in the United States for that kind of mission is also eligible. On to the 5th page of eligible activities. Demonstration projects are eligible. This is kind of the construction of a project that can kind of stand in a permanent or semi-permanent nature. We allow this under the Market Access Program. Sometimes in certain conditions for certain types of generic promotion, this can be a critical piece. Copyright, trademark, and patent registration fees, legal fees that go with that kind of work could be particularly interesting to someone who's trying to break into a new market through this program, someone who has seen some of their other markets diminished by some of the recent trade actions, but see opportunity in other markets but have copyright or trademark or patent registration issues in those markets, might be able to take advantage of this provision. Business cards for foreign markets, that's a logical thing to be in here. Website expenses, again, targeting foreign audiences are eligible. I'll stop right here to say make sure you read the rules. There are other minor things that are included in the eligible activities, but I want to take a minute to address that one bullet I haven't. Technical assistance to address non-tariff barriers to U.S. exports. And so this might not have meaning to everyone on the call, but to a lot of organizations that we work with, this may be critical. We operate a program, as some of you know, called the Technical Assistance for Specialty Crops Program that allows funding to be used for kind of a different class of activities to address SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary, and other non-tariff barriers, other technical non-tariff barriers to trade. And that program is only available to the specialty crops industries. Because this program is new and different, we decided to make that type of activity available under this program to not just specialty crops industries, but to all of the industries that we serve. All the generic ag promotion organizations that come in for this program will be able to use this funding to do that kind of technical assistance work. And some of that includes pest research and things like that that are generally not fundable under the Market Access Program. So I encourage you to spend a little time reading that section of the reg as well. And again, if you have questions on that, because it's different, make sure that you submit them to our staff so that they can walk you through that. All right, I'm going to go through just a few key ineligible activities. There are a lot more ineligible activities listed in the reg. I'm not going to spend time on those, but these are kind of the most key. Contingent liabilities. That means the expenses that might be that a participant might become liable for opening an office or for employing someone overseas. Those types of liabilities are not reimbursable under the program. Most product research is not eligible under the program. There could be something that is a type of product research that would be eligible under that technical assistance that I was just talking about. So that's kind of why it says most as opposed to just product research. Product samples that are targeted to consumers. This is a difference from the product samples that I talked about being eligible earlier. The product samples that are eligible under this program to be purchased from the industry and then shipped, that's for substantial transformation or technical assistance in teaching an important audience overseas how to use your product properly. The product samples that are not eligible are product samples that are targeted at consumers. For example, someone who you can't promote potato chips through this program. By using product samples, excuse me. You can't purchase product samples of potato chips and then hand them out to consumers hoping that they'll be interested in potato chips. You can possibly ship potatoes and teach the industry how to make them into potato chips, but at that point you're working with trade and not directly with consumers. Coupon redemption is an ineligible activity. There's a little bit of coupon work that's described in the eligible activities. It was so minor that I didn't discuss it earlier, but any kind of coupon redemption or anything else that reduces the price of a promoted product is not eligible for program reimbursement. Anything derogatory about any other U.S. agricultural product. If part of your promotion is to denigrate another U.S. ag product, that our program is not to be used for that. Contributions to a reserve fund, that means taking some program money and just putting it in a pile off to the side to determine what to do with it at some future date. That's not an eligible activity. And there are various other things, as I said, on the list of ineligible activities. I'm not going to go through all those, but I encourage you again to read the rules. All right, program notices. Throughout the ATP reg, or the final rule, you will find references to, from time to time, the CCC will publish information to kind of flesh out a concept that's in the rules. For example, there's the reference that I made earlier to giveaways being reimbursable at $2. We have that's actually in a program notice. It's not, the regulation does not establish $2 as the limit. There's a program notice that establishes $2 as the limit. That would give us the flexibility if there was some reason to increase it to $2.50 next year. We could do that through a program notice and not through rulemaking. And again, I want to point out that this is my chance to point out that the program notices can be found at this on the FAS website on a new page that addresses the Agricultural Trade Promotion Program. This is not the only thing on that site. The program notices will be there. The regulation should be available there. The notice of funds availability should be available there. Once this webinar ends and has been recorded and processed properly, this webinar will be posted on that website. And depending on the number of questions and answers that we get over the next couple of months, we may well put up a Q&A document that would be updated from time to time on that website as well. So it's key to make a note of that. Information, all the information will be there, and information that we haven't even come up with yet will be added there. All right. Other significant notes about the program. Companies that have graduated from the branded program of the market access program may be eligible to participate in the ATP. So the way MAP graduation works, that if a company has expended CCC funds in a market for 5 years, they're no longer eligible for funding in that market. Under this program, ATP funds could be given to that company if they remain eligible to participate, or if they're determined to be eligible to participate in the ATP. The program is operated on a reimbursable basis generally. Advances are possible. I encourage you, if you're a generic applicant, that you take a look at the advances section of the regulation. Evaluation and reporting are required. Of course, this is a federal program. We're going to require that you provide us evaluation information and that you report on a variety of things, including filing trip reports and other types of reporting. It's all described in the reg. I'm not going to walk everybody through that. I think it's pretty self-explanatory to someone who reads through the evaluation and reporting sections. The program is subject to compliance review. FAS has a compliance review staff that reviews participation in its other programs. We anticipate that the compliance review staff will be visiting ATP participants in the future and reviewing their documentation as well. Certainly, the compliance section of this rule, the other management and the other management sections are incredibly important to be successful when the compliance review staff visits. Contracting procedures and anti-fraud plans are required. Organizations that participate in the Market Access Program are familiar with the concept of contracting procedures and anti-fraud plans. They must be submitted and approved by the Foreign Agricultural Service before your program can begin. Similarly, an ATP participant that's going to run a brand program needs to have its operational procedures for that brand program approved before it can operate its branded program. All of this is described in greater detail in the reg, but I'm not going to take the time to wander through it all today. In fact, I've reached the end of the slides that were prepared for the webinar. This slide is pretty important. It has contact information for the two divisions that will operate the ATP. The Program Operations Division handles the regulations. It handles the program agreements. It will handle all the reimbursement under this program. Kurt Alt is the director, and he can be contacted with questions of that nature. The Cooperator Programs Division will be the liaison division for applicants and participants in the program. Corey Pickelsheimer is the director of the Cooperator Programs Division. I'll go back for a minute. Under the Program Operations Division, one important thing that they do is that they operate the UES. The UES being the Unified Export Strategy Database System. That's the way that we're encouraging people to apply for the program. It's also the database system and its accounting system are the way that people will be reimbursed under the program. So any UES questions should be directed to Kurt Alt and his division down there. With that, I'm going to go to the very last slide, which is questions. And I'm going to turn to a list of questions that I have on the screen. If anyone's going to be asking questions from now until this comes to an end, the time to submit them is now. I've got a list here, and I'm going to do what I can to answer as many as I can. And then I may have to do some interpretation, so this will be a little less awkward, or a little bit more awkward than the planned slide. So I have one question: will we be able to recast our contributions promise for the FY19 UES recently submitted so as to include the ATP 10%? That is a great question. We have not considered it. But I believe that there is time to talk about that. You won't get a decision on that question today, but for those people who participate in the MAP and FMD, you're aware that those programs operate with a formula that modifies the initial qualitative review recommendation that's made by the marketing specialists in the Cooperative Programs Division. So it's critical in that program. The contribution rate is included in that mathematical formula. But because we haven't run that formula yet, I think we can still consider that. I'll have to talk to some people about that, but that's a very good question. Do we need to reapply each year like GBI? I do not anticipate that we will be opening this program for additional applications unless we get an additional infusion of funds, or unless a decision is made that there's enough money left after the initial tranche of funding that we should call for additional applications. So I think the expectation, but it's only an expectation, is that we would get enough requests against this November 2nd deadline that all of the money in this, what we're calling a surge of funding, would be allocated under that. But that remains to be seen. But again, that is a good question. Now, what will happen, I think, because it says like GBI in this question, there will probably be a need at the end of someone's first year participating in the program, or program period, I believe it's called in these regs. Then that first program period, if there's money left over because there are multi-year activities in there that will need to do some reducing 2019 budgets to increase to establish 2020 budgets. I think that's what you're referring to there. And yes, I anticipate that we will be needing to do that kind of thing as we move forward into multiple years. For multi-year grants, how many years are allowed? That is a great question. That has not been defined because we wanted to leave it undefined. Our agreements under the MAP and FMD program, as you may know, are 3 years to begin with. And so I think an initial ATP program agreement might be set at 3 years, but it's the multi-year nature of the activities that would carry on throughout. Deadline extensions beyond that 3 years, I think we're going to need to contemplate that 2.5 years from now. It's just too early for us to think of whether or not we would need to go beyond 3. But I think that we would stick with the maximum time period to use funding that's made available under this initial surge of funding would be 5 years. That we would consider extensions possibly beyond 3 years up to 5. Next question. Let me do something administrative here so that's a little bit easier for me to work on this. I have a part of a question. It looks like, and is the program not open to any and all commodities? I believe that the program's open to any and all commodities, but I will return us to an earlier slide where the requirement under eligible organizations, this slide says that nonprofit U.S. Ag trade organizations, nonprofit state regional trade groups, state agencies, and U.S. Ag cooperatives that can demonstrate damages suffered as a result of tariffs imposed on U.S. agricultural products in 2018-19. I would say that it's incumbent on the applicant to demonstrate damages that were suffered as a result of tariffs imposed on U.S. ag products. If that's not the question, you can ask it again and I will try to address it. A lot of the information being required for the ATP is information that we already have submitted in the online UES under areas such as profile, executive summary, etc. How do we handle this for ATP? Is there a separate area for ATP information, or do we modify information already submitted? So for any market that has already been described as well as is necessary in your existing UES, you could simply add ATP activities to that market. If you need to make an adjustment to a market description or your analysis in the UES, you'll be able to make that. You'll be able to make changes there as well. I think that in that case, or in the case of adding a brand new market, which we are hopeful that we're going to be seeing under this program, I would call that out to the marketing specialist who, if this is an issue for you, you already know who your marketing specialist is. I would call that the additional information out to your marketing specialist so that they are aware that they should be looking at it. But you certainly don't need to go back in and redo your profile. Okay, another question about targeted for tariffs. I think I covered that one. if we apply via the UES, do we revise the UES overview to show trade impact that addresses ATP funding? I would say, and this is a good question, I would say that every organization needs to be front and center in demonstrating the damages suffered as a result of tariffs. For a new organization applying, they can do that in many places. For an organization that already has a UES, I would go into one of the higher level portions of the UES, market by market if that's most appropriate, or in sort of an executive summary if that's most appropriate, up to you. And do I would do the most outstanding job. Okay. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to try to back up a couple of questions. All right, I'll go back to this one. If there's a nonprofit state association that represents a specialty crop, is the state association able to apply for funding, or does the state association need to apply through the national association that represents the specialty crop? And so at that point I go back to the priority slide, which should be on the screen. The priority slide reads, the CCC gives priority to organizations that have the broadest producer representation and affiliated industry participation of the commodity being promoted. We can't say with certainty who's going to apply for this program. However, if we're confronted with a national organization that has applied and a state organization that has applied to promote the same commodity, if the National Association is able to successfully deliver a program, then the burden would be on the state to explain why they should either be selected over the National Association or why they should be funded separately from the National Association. The next question, for multi-year activities, do cooperators need to break out spending by year? My answer to that was that if cooperators are asking for a multi-year activity, it would be best if they gave us an idea of what their plan was, because that's part of reviewing the idea, I think. However, I don't believe that we're going to be issuing agreements that have that identify specific budgets from year to year. So that may not be necessary in this case. I think, well, I don't know when I said this, I'm a little bit confused now, but we intend to be as flexible as we can on some of these issues that we're going to be dealing with, either for the first time or that where we brush up against other programs, because this program is is a little bit unexpected for all of us. Next question was, can the ATP funds be used for any activities in Cuba? The answer is no. Interestingly, the Senate version of the Farm Bill that's under consideration right now includes the potential that market access program and foreign market development cooperator funding would be eligible for use in Cuba. However, those programs are named specifically in that language, and the Agricultural Trade Promotion Program, of course, is not. So it would remain ineligible in Cuba. So back to questions I haven't answered before. To what degree will the crop's degree of harm be created by tariffs be considered in the allocation determination? That's a little hard to say, because it's not something that's necessarily going to be quantifiable in a way across all of the different commodities that apply. We're going to be looking at that, of course, at some level, but we're also going to be looking at applicants' ability to deliver a program, experience in foreign market development, and the quality of the ideas that we're looking at. But again, we are going to be making sure that a group has made a solid case for its inclusion in the program. Oh, I just missed one. Where did that one go? There was okay, I see it. All right. Do we expect that the evaluation of ATP applications will delay FMD 19 approval letters? We do not actually anticipate that our work on the ATP will delay the 2019 programs, except that we know that we're 1 month away from the expiration of the current Farm Bill, and there's not a replacement, either an extension or a new Farm Bill in place at this time. Now, it's possible that there will be one, but if the Farm Bill expires, we cannot continue to work on future programming for Farm Bill programs. So it is not impossible that at some point, if there's a delay in either an extension of the Farm Bill or a new Farm Bill being enacted, it's possible that there will be some overlap in the timing. But we can't really anticipate how that's going to work. Is the rule really final, or are comments going to be accepted? The rule is really final. We are not taking comments on the rule that has been published. I have a question here. You mentioned that multi-year applications can be eligible. Do applications have to be multi-year? Applications absolutely do not have to be multi-year. Applications could have a single activity in them if that's what's appropriate to the group that's applying. Will we need to create new constraints/performance measures for ATP activities, or can they be the same as MAP and FMD activities? If an existing constraint or performance measure that's in your 2019 UES, if you're a MAP or FMD applicant for 2019, and that is appropriate to your proposed ATP activity, you do not need to create a new constraint or performance measure. In light of new realities, instead of just adding to the current UES, can we strike it and submit a completely new UES that incorporates the request for new funding? I don't think that's possible. Our marketing divisions have spent the summer reviewing applications that came in against a June deadline, and while that might not be the ultimate perfect world, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have this problem in the first place, I guess. But we're not going to be able to intake completely new UESs and turn around FMD funding decisions in a month, or MAP in just a couple of months. We are waiting for news if China will impose additional tariffs. Will FAS consider applications in light of any tariff changes in the coming weeks? And this is an interesting question, and it's one of the reasons why I hesitate to put too much of an answer on how are we going to consider damage due to tariffs, et cetera, because it's a changing environment from week to week so far. We don't know what the environment's going to do in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 months, and so it's really hard for us to make those predictions, and it would be unfair for us to kind of lock ourselves in on something right now in regard to that. You mentioned that we will submit the application to the 2019 UES system if we already have an activity submitted in the UES. Do we need to somehow resubmit it for ATP? For example, we want to add a trade show for ATP but already have submitted a trade show activity in the UES. How does this work? It's a pretty good question. Someone has been working all summer again to consider what you've submitted against the other two programs. I would suggest that if the time comes where you are submitting an ATP application and you want your marketing specialist to understand that. At some point you're going to be discussing with your marketing specialist how to allocate MAP or FMD funds that you were allocated in 2019. I think this is just part of that conversation, and we'll work as best we can to make it as seamless as possible. But it might not be possible to make it completely seamless, that's for sure. If you are conducting a multi-year promotion, do you only have to submit a single report? Reporting is annual. It's a required annual function, and so annual reports will need to be submitted. However, an activity that's ongoing, part of the report will be that the activity is ongoing. Obviously, results that haven't been achieved yet won't be reportable, but that's certainly you'll need to report the status of the projects. If a tariff situation is resolved, how does it impact ATP? Obviously, some tariff situations are going to come and some tariff situations are going to go. And for that reason, I want to refer back to the answer I gave before, which is it's a shifting landscape, and this is not the only criteria that we're looking at. We're certainly looking at an organization's ability to deliver a program experience, management experience, quality application is always important when we operate programs like this, and we certainly understand that it's out of your control that a tariff situation evolved, devolved, or was resolved. Any additional details on how to actually submit via the UES system would be greatly appreciated. I would refer that question to your marketing specialist. I'm not going to get into the details of UES submission on this call, but your marketing specialist hopefully will be able to help you in the next few days. Will ATP funds be available for emerging markets, new opportunities, or only markets where there's proof of negative business impact due to tariffs, trade barriers? Absolutely. We're hoping that a significant amount of ATP funds will be dedicated to searching out new markets. We are very hopeful that one of the silver linings on the cloud that is currently overhead is that commodity organizations will be able to identify new markets and build a bigger portfolio of export destinations. Another question on that, is there preference given to either adding to an existing MAP and FMD market or opening a new market? No, it's incumbent on the applicant to make a case for the things that they're proposing, and it could be that in one industry the most appropriate thing to do is add to an existing MAP or FMD market, and for a different organization the most appropriate thing is to attack new markets, no question about it. Do we need to track the spending separately from other funding, such as MAP, codes, and accounting? For example, if we're using MAP funds for an in-store sampling in a target country and also wish to use ATP, do we need to keep those funding pools separate? Yes, absolutely. You will be reviewed on ATP separately from how you're reviewed for MAP. Groups that participate in MAP and FMD now face that situation every time the compliance reviewers show up. Is this program meant to prioritize new markets or existing markets or both? That's obviously a common question. Existing markets and new markets are both welcome. January, December, and June, July periods, yes. We will have different program period opportunities, and that's included in the rules somewhere. Can we apply for ATP funds for a market in which we are already receiving MAP funds? Yes, we've covered that one. Absolutely, you can. Okay, so how do we adequately document tariff damage? Many tariffs are just coming online, and GATS data will not reflect lost exports in the near term. We are fully aware of that, and what we're saying is that you need to do the best job you can to explain your situation. We understand and we face the same thing, that people ask us, what's the damage due to this tariff, and in some cases we can estimate it better than others, but in some cases it's very difficult to estimate. We understand that you're facing that, and we want you to make the best case you can. And we understand that that's the situation that you're in. That's another one of those, so I'll skip it. When is the earliest date on which funds are likely to be available to expend? For groups whose UES periods extend from August to July, could we amend 2018-19 UES to include ATP-funded activities or request ATP funds availability for that period in our 2019-20 UES just submitted in June of 2018? My answer to that would be if you think you need money now and you're on a July to June MAP year, ask for a January to December ATP year. It may be somewhat awkward. I'm not, what we're dealing with here is something that's awkward from the get-go. If you think you need funds in February, but you normally operate on a different year, consider operating this program on the early year. How much funding should for-profit companies expect to receive? That is not a decision that can be made at this time. If you're a for-profit company and you're interested in participating, I would refer you to the State Regional Trade Group that covers your region as a starting point. Not that you'll end up there, but that's who I would contact about how they see the program operating. And they probably won't be able to answer the question, to be honest, until they see if they got an allocation and then how much it was. Do we still request money by activity like we do in the UES, or just request one lump sum with a summary of activities? No, you'll be required, and it's available now, to put together a 10-digit activity code for every ATP activity that you propose. For example, you might have a MAP activity for 2019 that reads M19GX ABCDE. Under the ATP, you will be able to submit an activity that's A19GX 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you will be able to, you will need to submit activities with 10-digit activity numbers, and the key reason for that is you'll be reimbursed against activities, and that's an absolute requirement for reimbursement. What sort of goals and results need to be outlined for the activities? I would say that if you're someone who's participating in the program, the person who asked this is, we're going to be expecting the same kind of input and reporting and evaluation that we do under the other programs. Would an ATP applicant be able to use ATP funds in domestic markets such as Puerto Rico? The answer to that is unfortunately no. There was some consideration being given to a domestic marketing program, but it was not ultimately approved. Regarding having an approved contracting procedure and anti-fraud plans, would an application approval be contingent on whether the aforementioned items are already available or not? The answer to that is yes. Having an approved plan is required to operate a program. But if you are not currently in one of our programs and you are interested in doing this, and this is something that's a little bit unusual for you, I suggest that you make the contacts that are available on the in this presentation as soon as you can, and they will be able to help you, put you in the right hands to start developing such documentation. can we make applications for processed products if we can indirectly demonstrate damages? Absolutely, processed products, as long as they're eligible under the program, that's defined in the program. We absolutely expect to promote processed products under this program. I dropped off while talking about demonstrating damages. I think I went back over that. If not, send that request again, and I'll see it at the end. Is the rule really final, or comments going to be accepted? I answered that one. The last item you mentioned before going dark was, do we need to adjust the UES to reflect the potential damage? Okay, so that I'll assume that means that I need to answer that now. We understand that it's going to be difficult in some cases, or maybe in all cases, to demonstrate damage. I believe it's incumbent upon the applicant to make the best case that they can. Remember that other applicants are going to be making their case as well. The way that I would look at this if I were you is that there will be a day in December when Corey Pickelsheimer, whose name is on your screen right now, the director of the Cooperative Programs Division, is going to come up to my office, and he's going to tell me what his folks are recommending for ATP funding. And they're going to explain it to me, and I'm going to take it all in, and I'm going to review some of the stories that have been told as to why and how people have been damaged and why it's important that they get a certain level of funding. And I'm going to be taking those recommendations to other people and making that case. The case that I'm going to be able to make will be limited to the case that you made. So if you make a fantastic case, I'll be able to make a fantastic case for you. If you make a lukewarm case, then that'll be the limit as to how good of a case I'll be able to make for you. Hopefully that answers that question. What is the timeline for approval and beginning activities? We certainly expect to be reviewing ATP applications urgently through November and the beginning of December, the first half of December, and we expect to be making recommendations for funding to the executives around here in the second half of December, with the target of being able to start operating the program in January sometime. So the program is a cost share program rather than a grant program. Yes, everyone will be required to, if they're promoting generically, they'll be required to provide at least 10% of what we provide in cost share. However, we have been told in multiple times in other venues that regardless of our cost sharing requirements, that this program and others like it are actually grant programs. Okay, I'm coming to the end of my questions, so if you have any last minute questions, you may want to add them now. How will FAS know if we've added new sentences to various parts of the existing 2019 UES? These additions would be made to fulfill required information, but might be added to the profile, executive summary, performance measures, etc. Will FAS be able to see these additions? That's a great question. We are working frantically behind the scenes to be able to make the UES able to deliver on this program. A lot of that, of course, is being done to the accounting system, and less attention is being paid to what we might call text, shall we say. So if you are making changes to the text, I suggest that you keep a log of what those changes are, and that you proactively provide that log to your marketing specialist, to you and your branch chief, who you know are going to be reviewing this. I would like to say otherwise, but at this point, to get this program up and out, I just don't see that we're going to be able to do anything different from that. Is required annual reporting done through CPR? You're going to need to work through your marketing specialist and your branch to determine whether country progress reporting is the appropriate way for you to report, to do evaluation and report. Since some groups do it differently from others. circling back to your earlier Farm Bill expiration comment, if we enter a period of no Farm Bill coverage, will OTP still continue accepting, reviewing ATP applications? The answer to that is absolutely yes. The Farm Bill expiration will have no impact on our ability to work on this program or the quality samples program for what that's worth. It only has an impact on whether we can work on Farm Bill programs. Now, if there was a government shutdown, that would be a different answer. The government shutdown, we would have to stop working on a program like this. Will additional compliance staff be hired, and who will pay for them? That is a good question. We have not made determinations on additional staff, and we have not made decisions as to how administrative expenses for this program will be covered. Those discussions are ongoing, but it's a very good question, and we are aware of it for sure. Will the tariff damage estimates provided by applicants be compared to USDA's internal estimates, which haven't really been accessible to view? That question, I understand why that's a great question. It's a little bit premature for us. We will certainly be reaching out to other parts of FAS to help us review these applications. And I would assume that if there are if anybody on my staff or other parts of FAS think that there's significant difference between what's been submitted in an ATP application and what they're seeing elsewhere, that'll be identified. But we will certainly not just take it as a problem, but something that we need to look into, because maybe it would be possible that what we're looking at is flawed and would be better if we considered your information. Will an ATP applicant receive a lump sum of ATP funds, or will specific activities be funded at certain levels? I covered that earlier. Every activity will need to have a 10-digit activity code. Would damage to trade partnerships as a result of pulling out of TPP or renegotiating NAFTA also be considered? That's an interesting question, and I don't know that the answer to the TPP part of it and the answer to the NAFTA part of it are the same answer. What I would say to that question is, one last time maybe, is that it is incumbent on someone who's applying for these funds to make a great case for themselves. And as I said earlier, it's possible that what the situation that we're in today on August 31st is significantly different from the situation that we're sitting in on November 2nd when applications are due. The rule does say suffered damages as a result of tariffs imposed on U.S. agricultural products. I would use that as guidance, and again, it's up to you to make that explanation. So it's possible that you could make a case that fits that line on page 1 of the NOFA in a way that we weren't anticipating, but is compelling. So I think that's a critical part of your application. Assuming cost share means it can be in kind. Yes, if you read the contribution rules, it talks about in-kind contributions for sure. Are we subject to competitive bidding? I think I talked about that earlier. Slotting fees, competitive bidding is required. There's a contracting section of the rule. I encourage you to read it closely. Contracting plan must be submitted and approved as well. Retail slotting fees are not eligible under the program. They're specifically listed in the ineligible section. Do we submit a hard copy as well as electronic? That's up to you. The electronic copy is what we're going to be looking for the most, because it, obviously it connects to the accounting system, and we certainly hope that that we'll see quality electronic copies. But we also understand, and you understand, that by asking the question that sometimes it's easier to read a hard copy. We'll certainly accept hard copies as well. All right, I'm down to 2 questions. First is, when will the web link of this webinar be posted to share with our team members? I don't know the answer to that exactly, and I don't think anybody does, particularly because we had the glitch in the middle of the webinar where I disappeared for a while. The people who are running this webinar are going to take the recordings and then have to edit them down into something more consumable than something that has a 15-minute break in the middle. It'll be up as soon as it can be, and I would continue to check that website that was posted in the webinar, the ATP website on the FAS, on the Creator FAS website. And finally, the last question I have right now, if you have any others, you better type them in quickly. Will any funds be held in reserve? At this point, the answer is we are not anticipating holding any funds in reserve. However, we do not know what kind of applications we'll receive. It would be premature to say an absolute yes or an absolute no to this question. However, it's a $200 million program. If we got $500 million in requests, I think there'd be a significant pressure to allocate most, if not all, of the funding. If you mean a little bit of reserve, the way we keep a little bit of reserve in MAP and FMD, I would anticipate that we would in case there were any kind of errors made along the way. I see that 3 more questions have jumped in front of me, so I'm not quite there yet. To reiterate, the 300% of business size standards requirement for for-profits is similar to the MAP program requirement. Well, yes and no. The MAP program requirement is, the limit is the size standard under the SBA listing. This program, it's 3 times that requirement. So I'm going to make something up here. If for your industry, a small business is defined as having 500 employees, under the MAP, your limit would be 500 employees. If you had 501 employees, you'd be ineligible. Under this program, it's 3 times that. So the limit on employees would be 1,500, and if you had 1,501 employees, you would be ineligible. All right, what are we down to? 2 of the questions aren't questions at all. They're just thank you, so you're welcome. I'll address those together. I'm happy that you found it helpful. Is there a deadline by which you have to obligate the $200 million in agreements? I honestly don't know the answer to that. I will answer it by saying under the QSP, when September 30th rolls around, the last day of the fiscal year, we take the money back down offline. So we have, under QSP, we have $2.5 million annually that we get apportioned. If on September 30th we've only allocated 1.8 million, the other 700,000 just disappears and is not allocated. That said, I can't even imagine that we wouldn't be able to allocate this $200 million before September 30th, or that there wouldn't be pressure to do so. But again, we can't anticipate how this is going to all play out, and it's not beyond belief that we would face a situation where some of the money was, where this question came up toward the end of the fiscal year. All right, that all said, I don't have any remaining questions, and so if there are no more questions, we will conclude the webinar now. On behalf of FAS, I want to thank you for participating today, and to remind you that this webinar will be posted on the FAS website on the new page created for the Agricultural Trade Promotion Program. If you have further questions, please use the ATP contacts that remain on the screen right now. Kurt Alt's number in the Program Operations Division and Corey Pickelsheimer's number in the Cooperator Programs Division. Those 2 numbers are your direct contact information. And if you can get a hold of anybody else in in the Cooperative Programs Division or Program Operations Division or the front office of the Office of Trade Programs, we will make sure that your question gets in the right hands. That being said, and I see no more questions, I'm going to say thanks once again and goodbye.
Thank you, and this concludes today's call. We thank you for your participation and ask that you please disconnect your line.